Please put your hands together and help me give a warm welcome for our host, Rick Ramsey.
All right. How's everybody doing? So you are in for a super treat. This guy seated right next to me, Stephen Beres, Mr. Stephen Beres, Senior Vice President of Production at HBO. Also one of my dearest friends. Actually, this guy created one of the most amazing moments for my son by allowing us to tour the Game of Thrones production site in Ireland, yes, which was absolutely by far the most amazing thing I have ever done. But he's here today to answer your questions, and I just want to kick it off with just a couple questions. You are responsible for so many shows that a lot of us here watch, including Westworld, Game of Thrones, soon to come out this summer, House of the Dragon. And you guys, make sure you get that title right, because I hear a lot of people say House of Dragons, but I've caught myself
House
as
of
well.
Dragons, I think, is a Chinese restaurant. Just down it's very good. I've got a great Kung Pao chicken.
So there are so many things that I know you as an audience want to ask Stephen about, and we're going to get to those in a minute. But I want to just touch real quickly on what is different with regard to the House of the Dragon when it comes to production, because now you're doing that virtual.
Yeah.
And then when I toured Game of Thrones, we were all over Belfast. Like, we were literally all over Belfast looking at everything.
Yeah. It's the antithesis of virtual, the original series. Well, first of all, thank you, Rick, for doing this with me. Rick and I now have we've been doing this for 5 years or something. I think 5 Hall of Fames. We've done the Q&A. So I appreciate you doing that, and I appreciate you, Rick, for being here for me. And this is why it's so important to really understand the value of the instructors that you work with here at Full Sail, because Rick is such an important part, continues to be such an important part of my life. And there would be no Game of Thrones without Rick Ramsey. So a round of applause. Round of applause, Rick. That's true. So no, I was so glad to have you guys out to the show, and you got an opportunity to experience how we did the show in the past for 10 years. Rick was out the night that we had, Melee was out. We had the big boat battle between the Silence and the other ship, and we had this massive sort of 2 half of full size sailing ships, a giant 3-story tall green screen that encircled the entire thing, fog and smoke and all that sort of stuff. And the problem with doing something like that, first of all, that was the only way we could do it then. There was no other way to do some kind of a massive, what would be virtual set extension eventually back then. There was no other technology that we can use. The problem is it limits us a little bit and limited us a little bit in how much we could shoot there, because every minute, every second that we rolled would be a very complicated visual effect shot for us as soon as we got to post. In fact, that one, we shot that at night for about a week. That 1 week turned into about 8 months of post-production to get that final sea battle done that you see in the show. And so now we have the ability for House of the Dragon to do a lot of that work in the virtual stage that we have built at Leavesden, the V stage at Leavesden, just outside of London at Warner Brothers Studios. Much like the V stage here, smaller scale here, but exactly the same concept, we're able to now put action into this virtual environment, which on the very simplest, level allows us to easily transition between different places. We're not driving all over Belfast anymore. I almost got Rick killed by accidentally driving on the wrong side of the road for a minute, but it was fine. We're still alive, so it's all we're okay.
I can't believe you remember that.
Oh yeah. It was a good time. It was a good time. Rick will never forget that, I am sure. But we don't have to do as much travel. And over the past 2 years, obviously, like all of you, we haven't been able to travel like maybe we would have liked to. Instead, we're we're able to build these environments inside of essentially a game engine and shoot inside of this volume in a way that visually it is incredibly convincing. And in fact, we obviously want to make sure it is totally convincing and that you wouldn't ever think that it was outside, that it wasn't outside, that it wasn't in a real environment. But it also gives us the ability to put things in environments that can't exist, either because of physics or because of cost or because of the sensitive nature of an environment that we would have to shoot in, or because it would just be inhumane or impossible to actually put people in some of these places for long periods of time. So yeah, it's really changed the way that we've shot this show. I think this show is as visually compelling, if not more so, than the original. And we're able to do that without having to do the huge amount of travel. We still do a lot of travel. We still do establishing work in these amazing places. We still do drone photography to introduce a location. We still do big crane work and stuff like that. But then when we come to the simple dialogue exchange stuff, when we come to things that happen, you know, in a small group, we don't have to be outside when it's raining sideways in knee-deep mud and it's, you know, 20 degrees out. We can be, you know, inside in a climate-controlled environment, and we can get the scene work, the performance work, the stuff that you guys fall in love with these characters because of. We can get that done in a much more controlled environment. We can get better work done that way. So it's a really neat way to balance amazing visuals with really, you know, really great and, more importantly, a little bit more comfortable scene work.
So one more question about this, and I'm going to open it up for you guys. And the only reason I wanted to start a little bit about virtual production is because, yes, we did open the new studio. How many got a chance to see that yesterday during the open house? It's pretty amazing, right? And it is so much fun. But we are going to do another seminar. Today we have one on a production that's a feature that we'll be shooting over on that studio. And then tomorrow, Stephen's on another panel where we're talking specifically about virtual production. That's at 2 o'clock. So if you want to check your Hall of Fame app, if you want to get more information on that. This is an open Q&A. So I'm going to ask him one more question, and then you guys can ask anything that you want to ask, all right?
Literally anything. No,
Literally.
Nothing too intimate, nothing too personal. No problem. Whatever you're into.
Your development over the years into the role that you have now really started in post-production, specifically in transcoding. Back when, I hate when I have to start a phrase like that. Way back when.
I start so many phrases that way now, which is, yeah, depressing.
Back when there was a lot of, you know, we're still shooting a lot of film, but in order to put those things on air, or a lot of movie houses were converting to digital projection, those things had to be converted, right? And so you had created these workflows that streamlined that whole process, which led to HBO, right? So tell us a little bit about from where you started and what it is now. And I just want to get a feel for what your thoughts are on seeing, you know, living through that entire transition. Because from where you started to what you're doing now with virtual, it's almost like magic. You know what I'm saying? It's like horse and buggy to space shuttle.
Yeah, it's true. It really is. Yeah, that's funny. It really is. And I've said this before that I think, you know, when I started at HBO a decade ago, more than that now, almost 12 years ago, we shot 95% of what we shot was film. 5% was digital, and that 5% was not the high-end, you know, Band of Brothers, things like that. It was not that at all. It was the, you know, smaller project stuff. It was the more independent stuff. It was sort of lower stakes things. Now we shoot 95% of our shows digital, especially the big ones. And we shoot 5% of our shows on film, and they are more the niche films, the more, you know, period stuff, the more art project sort of stuff. So it has been a complete reversal in that. And I think that virtual production, the LED stage environments, are as fundamental a transition and inflection point in our industry as digital cinematography was a decade or more ago. Back then, that allowed us to have this sort of proliferation of projects being done at a budget level because they weren't spending millions of dollars on film. So they were able to create projects at a budget level for television that sort of fueled what we know now as the sort of modern renaissance of episodic television, right? And HBO had always been doing that before then, but we spend a significant amount of money on programming. We're now able to do more programming without spending significantly more money, and networks are now starting to understand the, deeply invested episodic dramas and, more serialized comedy. You just look at where Star Trek was 12 years ago and where Star Trek is today. You just look at the arc of the narrative that they invest in those shows now, how highly serialized they are, the production quality that goes into them, the dramatic quality that goes into them. I think it's a really good example of that is an engine that's largely fueled by digital photography. And I think that virtual production is that next step. To be able to take a show that there's no way they could travel. In most cases, sitcoms can't leave their stage. So to think that their stage could be literally anywhere they can imagine, and to the talent of their digital art department can basically put them anywhere, that is a quantum leap forward in what we will be able to do at scale. Because, of course, everybody can, Game of Thrones, the biggest show ever made for television, can do whatever it wants, right? We have a lot of resources, a lot of money, a lot of people. But that's 0.1% of the total amount of television being made. So when we sort of democratize these technologies across the bottom 99%, then all of a sudden we start seeing the quality level, or the, at least the narrative quality, or the ability to have a higher quality narrative spread out massively. And that's even true in non-scripted programming. Disney is doing a lot of work inside of Volume for their Disney-themed baking challenge shows, where they completely transform the environment that the bakers are in. They're not just always in the same sort of chintzy stage that they had about 2 days to, build a set for. They're in this virtual environment, and they're able to render something that is specific to the content in each episode. And so it's not just drama, it's not just comedy. It's sort of the whole space. A good example is we won't make this all about virtual production, but it's certainly poignant right now. And I will say that there is no other school on the planet that has a working virtual stage and has the ability to expose students to it, where there is a program for film, a program for show production, for the sort of technical theater side, and a game design program under one roof. That does not exist anywhere else on the planet. So the fact that you guys are here at this time and have the ability to expose yourself to that technology is amazing. Absolutely amazing. And it's a hallmark of Full Sail, of course, to have the most bleeding edge things all the time. But this isn't just about having the money to build a virtual set. There are plenty of schools that have the money to do things like that, but they don't have a game design program. They don't have a film program. They don't have a show production program. And without those three groups working in chorus together, and not just saying that Rick and his counterparts in the other schools do that work together, and they do, but that you have the opportunity to meet and become friends with and hang out at Arugas with a game design student, with a show production student, to meet the people that are going to be the people that fuel the engine of virtual production going forward, an industry that is starved for people. And the fact that you'll be able to not just be exposed to that technology, that is great, you will, that is a life-changing event, but that your contemporaries in these other programs will be the people that you will work with going forward. And you have an opportunity to gain that knowledge and form those relationships now. That's like a crazy advantage that no one else in the world right now, maybe I don't know what other school has the kind of, methodology and resources of Full Sail, but that is an incredible opportunity. Just incredible.
Well, wow, I can't thank you enough for that endorsement, I guess, but it's more than that. It's definitely passion felt, and I'm with you on that. I encourage you. My email is rramsey@fullsail.com. We are shooting a feature film starting Saturday, and if you wanted PA, there's where it's a SAG shoot, because we have William Forsythe and Michael Pare. These are two really dominant actors back in their day, but they're still very dominant figures in the industry. So it is a SAG shoot, and that means we can only have so many people on set. But if you're interested, you want a PA, if you're in game art, you want to come by and look at how the environments have been formulated and being used in set, if you're in film, just email me and we'll see if we can set up something in the schedule. This is the exposure that Stephen is talking about, and it's already available now, not just through the tours for Hall of Fame, but we're trying to get students in there. And then some of those degree programs that you mentioned will have specific curriculum starting to write in. And I just want to mention one more thing. I'm so proud of Full Sail for this. A lot of schools will build something like this just so they can open a degree in it, and then those students pay to use that facility. Full Sail built this, and I've written degrees for this, and none of those have been approved at this point. So it'll be a year before we even offer a degree. So if you want to get on the cutting edge, like, this is absolutely the time to do that. So, questions from the audience. We are ready to rock and roll.
Questions, comments, concerns, criticisms? Oh,
hold on,
he's
one
going to bring
second.
the mic, so
I should have explained that. We're going to bring a mic, so they'll recognize you with the mic and bring you the mic, and then you can do your question.
Because we can't see you at all. It's just blinding darkness out there, so.
Hi, so I'm wondering, when it comes to deciding on what you think is right for your programming, how does that process go, and how long does it usually take before you guys, like, say, yeah, this is what we want to move forward with, so this is what we want to, like, produce at least a pilot for and see how it goes?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, and not just our method, but I think the sort of method in general, there's sort of a few different routes that programmers take to decide what is going to go on to their service. So there's things that we develop in-house, meaning that a very simple part of the project has come to us. Sometimes as simple as, a known entity in the industry will come to us with an outline for an idea that they want to develop into a show, and our creative team will work with them to get writers to bring it to a place where we have screenplays and figure out if it's something that we think is going to work, and we'll bring in producers, we'll do all that, and we'll really develop it essentially from scratch. Sometimes things will come into us as more fully formed projects. Maybe that means there's a series of scripts already written. We have a whole series written, and there's some, there's been some conceit given to, this is sort of something that they're maybe shopping to a few different networks. And sometimes we'll get things brought in as a package from agencies where they will have talent attached to it in some cases with a fully sort of flushed out set of scripts and, a production team potentially, director maybe attached or something like that. And so, and of course there's kind of almost an infinite variety between, those 2 points. And it really just sort of depends. Certainly, you see a lot of, and sometimes we'll also have shows that are just completely done. They've been shot. Maybe they are a project from a foreign territory. So like we do a lot of work with the BBC and with ITV and stuff in the UK and Europe. And we'll bring stuff in from them that's already done, and it has aired over there and has maybe done very well, or we're doing a simultaneous release on our network and on theirs. And then sometimes there's just projects, especially documentaries and things, that are totally done, and we found them at a film festival or something like that, and they're already completed, and they come in that way. So yeah, there's really a whole variety, and it really depends on the show. It depends on the relationship with the creatives on the show. It depends on if they're, someone very new to the industry, or if it's an established relationship already. It depends on the representation structure, all kinds of different things. So the answer is sort of, there's probably an example of just about anything you could think of that either we or another network. some networks don't do as much development work as we do. They're really buying in from other studios, from producing studios. So you look at a studio like Warner Brothers, for instance, our sister company, Warner Brothers, also part of our studio networks group at Warner Media. They do a lot of for-profit television, so they're creating Ted Lasso, for instance, for Apple, and that is a production services deal with Apple. So they make the show, they hire the talent, they do the notes, they do everything, and then Apple buys that show in. So it's a Warner Brothers show that is being distributed essentially through Apple. Now, I'm not sure what the relationship is creatively on that show. I'm sure there's feedback between their creative executives and the people at Warner Brothers, but there are plenty of studios that do just that. They develop and then they sell to a third party, a Netflix or a Apple or something like that.
If I could also, the whole industry has kind of been turned upside down, especially with streaming services becoming popular, almost competing now with mainstream cinema. And then, some of those networks like Netflix, for example, really built, HBO existed way before Netflix, mostly in the beginning as a movie service, and then started creating its own content. Netflix sometimes, I know when we did Real Rob, which was shot here, the first season, before he could sell that, they wanted to see a pilot, right? So sometimes pilot series are things. And we've actually worked with grads to create pilots for shows that they wanted to pitch to certain networks. So that might be another thing.
Yeah, the more you have to back up and enforce an idea that you're trying to sell, the easier that idea is to sell. And that includes anything you're selling. That might be selling your personal talent. If, let's say, you want to be a director of photography, having an exceptional Instagram account with incredibly diverse photography in all kinds of different places, in all kinds of different lighting, so whatever, and having thousands and thousands of followers, that's real currency when it comes to finding an agent and then that agent finding you work and on and on. The same thing is true of writing. The more you write, it's like building muscle. The more you do it, the stronger it gets. The more you read other people's stuff, the more you get a screenplay and watch along with the movie that has been made to see how much of the page translated, how much of the log and everything actually made it into the direction of the scene. The more you can sort of build up those muscles, then the more you can listen to other writers talk about their process, take Aaron Sorkin's master class, whatever. The more of that sort of muscle you can build up, and that's true of any discipline. The more editing an editor does, the better you are, right? It's sort of a fallacy. The 10,000 hour rule isn't a real thing. It actually doesn't. You could do something wrong for 10,000 hours and be terrible at it. So it's not that you just do something for 10,000 hours, you're automatically going to be, like you're in the Matrix. It's really more that, applying and improving over 10,000 hours will make you an expert in something, not just, always tying your shoes wrong 10,000 times means you're just really good at tying your shoes wrong. So it doesn't necessarily mean that, but the idea of researching your craft at a very deep and meaningful level for a long period of time will make you better at that, which was not your question, but that's some bonus content. So there you go.
All right, next question. Right over there. There we are, following the finger pointing.
So my question for you is, you said about 10 years ago that you were talking about how it was mostly film and it wasn't really diversified in the digital world, and now we're going over to the virtual reality world, and we're going into that. And even about 5 years ago, we were going to more stylistic styles in film. People were like, oh no, I want to shoot on film because it gives the film look. How do you think, what look will we be looking for in the next 10 years in the industry?
Well, I think that, we sort of move in this concept of visual language. So we really try to establish the visual language of a show before anyone talks about the technical medium that we'll be shooting on, right? So what that means is that we want to understand the artistic aspect of specifically in that case, when we're talking about cameras, photography, cinematography, before we start sort of engaging the workflow and technology and post-production and filters and texturing and all of that sort of stuff. It's super important to first understand, you know, what's the visual story that we're telling here? You know, why do we want this show to look the way that we want it to look? How can we describe it in sort of the artistic abstract first? And then once we sort of all are on the same page about that, then let's back up into the right tools to do that. You know, if you think about it, you don't show up to, you know, you show up to build a house with a basic set of tools, right? But if you're trying to make a very specific house, you don't say, okay, well, I've got a cement mixer and I've got a staple gun and I've got a belt sander. Well, you're only going to kind of be able to build like one sort of thing with that, right? Whereas if you know, listen, I want a concrete poured house. I want the walls to be concrete. I want the ceiling to be made out of a very specific kind of wood. And I would like, you know, live trees inside of it or something. Well, then you're going to go out and you're going to find people that are experts in all those kind of crafts, and they're going to have very specific tools for that. So the same thing is true when, you know, Adam McKay sat down about 2 years ago to talk about the Lakers project, Winning Time, and, you know, sort of said, listen, we really want this to look like sort of, you know, a gritty kind of documentary crew around that time, 1970s Los Angeles, when, you know, Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar were becoming, you know, the stars that we all sort of know them today. Jerry Buss was still very much in charge of the Lakers. And so they're looking to create something that isn't simply something we could do by shooting 16mm film. Because A, it doesn't really work in the 4K television medium that we're going to distribute the show in. And so we start sort of thinking about, okay, well, what are the things that you love about the image that you're thinking about in your head? It's the texture, it's the warmth, it's the way that highlights bloom, it's the way that we have a diminished resolution, but we don't have, you know, sort of blurry out of focus. And so then we start sort of developing, okay, well, what does that look like? Well, we'll shoot it on 35mm film because that gives us these aspects. We're going to run it through a texturing pass in post-production because that allows us to get this extra sort of grittiness in the highlights without planting it all over the shadows where it's going to look really bad. Then we want to shoot with this type of lens because that gives us the right kind of blooming and it gives us the right kind of breathing when we, you know, rack focus or when we move through, you know, a zoom, we get the right kind of softness in the image. And that's sort of how we do it. But if we said, well, I want to shoot 35mm film because I want to shoot 35mm film. Well, great, but that will, you know, but what does that mean? You want it to look like a generic 35mm film show? That isn't, you know, that isn't really very exciting. That's going to look like a bunch of stuff out there, and it's going to be kind of plain and sort of vanilla, and that's not the sort of show that we want to make. They certainly didn't. Another great example is when we were doing Vinyl with Marty Scorsese. Marty came in with Polaroids that he had shot in like the underground punk rock scene in like the 1960s and 70s in New York, which I can't imagine what a Marty Scorsese in that environment would look like. He wasn't in the Polaroids, which I wish he was because I would have liked to have seen that. But you know, he said, you know, I want the show to look like this. And there's no way to do that. You can't shoot a motion picture on Polaroid. So we had to then work backwards to develop, it was shot on a digital camera, Sony Venice. And it used a texturing technology called live grain that allows us to emulate, and in the case of that show, 4 different film stocks at the same time in different parts of the image to give us this sense of these very sort of frenetic Polaroid pictures that sort of had a little bit too much motion blur and yellow bloomed a little bit more than green and blue, and we had this sort of like a little bit of red haze that was over a certain level of shadow, and a lot of that was created in post-production. So what it really meant is that we had to have a fairly clean digital image to start off with because the actual crafting of that look happened very heavily in post. And so, and Rodrigo Prieto, who is, in my opinion, one of the greatest DPs working right now, if not the greatest, you know, had an incredibly wise approach to let's sort of, again, work from the image that we want to create backwards into the technology and not the other way around. And too many people, and if you've ever watched a Project Greenlight or anything like that, will say, well, if I don't shoot my show on film, you know, I'm losing out. I'm you know, it's not going to be, my student film isn't going to be any good unless it's shot on film. The truth is that there's not a very big part of the population that can tell the difference. And definitely everyone can tell the difference if you didn't get that extra shot that you needed. You weren't able to go back and do pickups. You weren't able to put the time into the edit. You weren't able to put the extra character into the script because you couldn't afford that actor or actress because you were shooting film and you were using money there. No one will notice that your show is slightly more digital than it is film. Everyone will notice if there is a huge plot hole because you're missing a scene or you're missing an actor. So it's always, 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 always better to invest in the underlying pieces that make up the story that ends up on the screen than it is in the capture medium. And that's true across the board. That doesn't mean that we don't shoot a show like Westworld on film. We do, and Jonah and his team are deeply invested in that. But in the grand scheme of the budget of a show like Westworld, film is not a huge factor. Film does not dictate whether we do or don't do something because its percentage of the budget is much, much, much less. If you're a student film and you have $50,000 to $100,000, film could be 50% of your budget, especially now with processing costs and celluloid costs. So it just doesn't make any sense when you could buy a Blackmagic digital camera, which is very good. And if you understand the limitations of it, can be extremely good, and you can own it, and it's 2% of your budget. And will allow you to get all of the stolen pickup shots that you want in the middle of the night in a parking lot somewhere or whatever else. But that's what people are watching. They're watching the things that you shoot. They don't necessarily care how you shoot it.
If I could just for a second get on the soapbox here and tag into what you were talking about and the question you've asked. And the key word here is storytelling. The image needs to propel the story. And what I see a lot in the industry right now is there are two ways to get your script produced. One is you have an amazing story, an amazing pitch. You've got visuals that can help identify how that story should be shot, what it should look like. Two is you make it super economical to shoot. You know, I see too many of those. And it is sometimes a sad reflection because there are a lot of films, especially with all of the streaming services hungering for content. There are a lot of films that really, if there was just some time and artistry put behind it, the story could have been much more rich, much more developed, right? You guys know what I'm talking about, right? It's a little bit more of a free-for-all when you get on Hulu or Netflix, try to find something to watch over the weekend, and you're like, I don't know if this is going to be good or not. I don't know, you know? But then you have someone like Guillermo del Toro who started really in the visual aspect of it with art direction, right? And then cinematography, and now is directing and writing. And I don't know if you saw Nightmare Alley, but great story. I never expected the whole thing to be pretty much black and white, but it still is a great story. It tells the story. It's not what I expected from him at all, but it's a really good script, right? So you always want to balance that. If you really want to sell a script, sometimes making it producer friendly, instead of having 5 scenes, let's have 3 or 2, right? But then there's the other side. If you want to pitch it as a visual, you really have to compile those visuals and get them a real sense of what this is going to look like when it's done. That make sense? All right. Other questions? Where are we going? There we go.
Hi, my name is Cujo. I just graduated from the sportscasting program. I'm in the creative writing program now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And well, you kind of answered part of my question, but I was going to ask about how I would go about writing for HBO. Like, I have some ideas, and I would like to send them in to HBO in order to take it to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, that's not really my department. I don't work in the creative department, but traditionally all networks usually only take pitches through representation. So your first job is to find talent representation, to find an agency that will represent your writing, and then their job is to get it to studios. That's not to say that there aren't studios out there that will take unsolicited pitches, but bigger studios certainly don't. They don't take unsolicited work. We only take pitches through representation. So, like I said, the first job is to, well, your very first job is to write a lot. To write and write. And Larry Katz, my favorite analogy of his is that you know, you have to get out the mustard water before you get to the mustard, right? So you've got to kind of, you want to squeeze that off somewhere else before you get to the mustard on the hot dog, right? Nobody likes a wet hot dog. Nobody likes a soggy hot dog. So write a ton. That's your job right now, is to write as much as you can. And like I said earlier, right, is to find screenplays, watch the movie with the screenplay, listen to writers talk about their process, you know, be a student of that process, understand what it means to probably not sell your work right off the bat, but probably work in a writing room for, especially a television show. If you want to write for television, there are rooms of people that write television shows, and there are, you know, a series of PAs and a series of coordinators that work in those rooms to facilitate the writing of those shows. You meet a lot of writers and you read a lot of writing in that role. There's also agencies, a lot of the entry-level positions for agencies are people doing script coverage, which is you'll read a script and you'll cover that script, meaning you'll write a sort of brief synopsis of the script, and you end up reading thousands of scripts, hundreds of scripts a month, certainly thousands a year. And so that's another excellent way to accumulate a huge amount of knowledge about, you know, the format of writing for dramatic or comedy television or whatever, and then, you know, you move that into your own writing. But it's not impossible, but it's unlikely that you will write something at Full Sail that will get picked up by an agency and sold to a studio. But it is certainly possible to get your writing to a place where you can be hired as a writing assistant, be hired as a writing room PA, be hired as somebody doing script coverage. But like I said, the first job is to write and write and write and write and write until all the mustard water is out and you're writing some stuff that is worthy of a hot dog.
Thank you.
If you want to see that agent's role, this may sound silly, but really the last season of American Horror Story, the first half of that, there is a talent agent dealing with a writer, and it really is very insightful on how that relationship actually works.
Okay. Yeah, the second question is about the PA job on Saturday. I'd like to, what's your email one more time?
rramsey@fullsail.com.
Thank you.
Trick is every Full Sail instructor's email is their first letter of their first name and their last name.
Usually.
Yeah, so
Usually.
you
We
can
have
just give that a go. That works for agencies, that works for studios, that works. Doesn't hurt to just try like a first name dot last name, maybe first letter, last letter. Just saying, that does work.
All right, where are we going?
Where's the mic next?
Over there.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello. So, this is kind of a similar question we asked, but you see, my main goal is to become a professional video editor and cinematographer. So I was wondering, how does someone like me get into working for an HBO show, editing, whatever, the next Game of Thrones or whatever?
Well, yeah, that's a long path from here, but so that's a two-part question because those are two fundamentally different paths. And if you want to do either of those paths at a very high level, you'll probably want to decide which one you want to do more, because you'll need to focus pretty specifically on one of them. If you want to do smaller shows, if you want to do more of, you know, maybe more documentary stuff, then certainly shooting and writing, or shooting, I'm sorry, and editing is more probable. But feature film work or industrial television work, that is certainly going to be difficult to do both of those things. There are not a lot of cinematographer editors because those people are working at the same time on a show. And because the downline for getting more jobs in those departments, they're sort of in conflict with each other. So decide which one you prefer, and I would say probably focus more on one. That doesn't mean you have to stop doing the other one. Just decide which one you want to sort of put forward first. To become a feature editor or a television series editor, you need to be in the editors union. In order to do that, you need to start out probably as a post-production PA, someone who will work in the post office, not the post office, but the post office. Although I'm sure a certain number of them work in the post office, but the first step there is to find, and I say this generally about finding that person that can help you sort of take that first step. And often the best people are someone who is you, just sort of 3 or 4 years in the future. If you were to, let's say, want to be an editor and you were to call Walter Murch, if you somehow found Walter's phone number and you were to call Walter, he is a wonderful man and a good friend, but he is not the person to talk to at all. Right? He's not going to hire you as a PA. That's not what he does. He doesn't care. He doesn't have anything to do with that anymore. He sits, he edits his show, and a group of people support him in doing that. But someone that is the either post coordinator for that show, or even in some cases a post PA on that show is the person that you'll want to talk to. Because when somebody says, oh, hey, we need one more hand for the last 3 weeks of this project because we've got a ton of turnover to do and we're late on this cut and we're just going to need some extra help. Does anybody know someone that could fly in for the day or the next couple weeks or the next month or the next 2 months to help us get this thing finished? And so you want to be in a position where you're the person that someone says, oh yeah, I spoke with this gentleman. He seems like a cool guy. He's into it. Now, how do you get there? The nice thing about the internet and the terrifying thing about the internet is that you can find a lot about shows and who works on them. IMDb is a great place. Find movies, find television shows that you like the work that's not just like, I like Game of Thrones, because everybody likes Game of Thrones. And we appreciate that. We love Game of Thrones. But do you like that type of show? Do you like the editing work that is happening on that type of show? Can you distill editing technique out of it? And if so, then you can reach out to someone who is a post-production PA, who is a post-coordinator, who is an assistant editor, perhaps, and say, hey, I'm just graduating, I have just graduated, I am graduating, and I am really interested in the way that your show used this particular editing technique, and I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about it. Do you have 15 minutes for a Zoom someday? And all you need is one person to say, yeah, sure. I can. Let's set up some time. I'll chat with you. That's fine. Seems like you're interested in it, and be able to converse at a technical level where you're putting yourself on more equal footing with that person, and you seem cool and not weird, and someone that maybe could help this person out in the future. They'll remember that, as opposed to just being at a networking event or something and sort of, here's my business card, and nobody cares. We collect 100 of these business cards every night and nobody remembers who they're from. I think that's a waste of time. I think if you could make one real meaningful connection with someone, well, they're going to remember the conversation that you had, and maybe, because you're going to follow up with them, maybe they'll remember the next time that they have an opportunity to say, oh, you know what, actually, I think I do know someone. Hold on, let me make a call, see if they're available. And that's sort of how you do that, if you want to be a cinematographer, the very best thing to do, again, it's the advice I gave over here, is you need to be an image maker that has a huge catalog with a huge amount of diversity, demonstrating a lot of talent, demonstrating a lot of originality, and demonstrating an artistic eye. And your Instagram feed very much is a calling card. Your YouTube channel very much is a calling card for people who want to be professional image makers. And so you have to get out and shoot. You have to spend your leisure time taking still photography, taking still photos, taking motion pictures. You need to do that. You need to have that stuff in a place where it's easily accessible. You need to share it with other cinematographers. You need to use the right hashtags. You need to do all that sort of stuff because you need to gather a following. If you have 5,000 Instagram followers, then that's currency. That's something you can take to an agency and say, listen, I've got this huge Instagram follower base. I've done these films. Other filmmakers have found me because of that. We've done whatever. That's all currency. That's all proof that you can do what you say you can do. Because you can walk in and say, I'm a cinematographer. I can shoot your next show, or I'm an editor. I can edit your next show. You have to be able to prove that. And if you have material that backs that up, you have a portfolio that is externally facing, that is not just stuff you did in school or with your friends, or it is stuff that cultivates an audience, that gains followers, that is significant. And now agents and studios and creative understand that, and they understand that value. So the idea of like, oh, this guy's just like an Instagram guy or whatever, that doesn't exist anymore. Like directors of photography who don't have great Instagram account. Roger Deakins has an Instagram account. He's maybe one of the greatest living directors of photography, and he has an Instagram account because he loves photography. And so it's just a great place to share neat photography. But if you're just starting out, it's a required tool. You have to have that, because if I'm researching a DP and they don't have an Instagram account and they don't have that stuff, I question it. Like why wouldn't you have that right now? Like, do you not enjoy doing this? Is this something that you're doing until you get something else? Especially new DPs. I think it's super important.
Thank you very much. And follow my Instagram if you will.
Yeah, get it on.
Follow
him on the Insta. Hit him up on the
Follow
Insta.
me. Talk to me after this. Yeah.
Listen, remember that every person in the industry has had to do that grunt work, that PA work. They know what that path is like, okay? So it's not like you're trying to reach out to some god who's never been where you are right now, okay? Other question. Oh, all the way in the back there. Nalani.
Hey, Stephen. First of all, I'd like to thank you so much for being so gracious with your time and giving back to all of our students, the next generation of filmmakers. There's a couple of questions from YouTube, and they wanted to know, knowing what you do now, having been in the industry for a good amount of time, what advice do you have to offer, if you were a student graduating now? And also, what is the most important lesson that you've learned from being in the industry?
Yeah, actually, I think those two questions actually have a lot to do with each other. I think both something that I guess maybe I wish that I was told, maybe it was something that I happened to intuit, and I think something that's really important to realize or to capitalize on when you first enter the industry is trying to do something that a lot of other people don't know how to do right now. So we'll come back around to the virtual production piece. Trying to find that niche where you are the person in the room that knows that little bit more than someone else, because I've been doing this for a very long time. I'm not necessarily at the cutting edge of everything, or I'm, let's say, a production designer and I've been working every day for the last 19 months. I have not had an opportunity to learn this new tool, to understand this new technology. And so I'm a cinematographer and I don't necessarily understand the ins and outs of the workflow of what goes into transferring files off of my digital camera, off of those memory cards into a computer and making sure that's all safe, and I don't understand all that. That's where you guys have an opportunity to have incredibly timely knowledge on that, have a much more native technical being because you live and breathe computers and devices and screens and social and all of that stuff all day long. It's part of your leisure. It's part of your day-to-day. It's part of your schooling. It's part of how you interact with this place. You have the ability to be the person for that person who is in a very senior position, or their team is in need of a very specific skill set. I'll give you an example. The art department on a show, because we've been talking about the other parts a little bit, so we'll shift over there. The art department on shows about 10 years ago had no digital draftspeople. That was a service that they would sort of bring in. They would find somebody, maybe they would do digital shop drawings, and the idea of doing 3D renderings of a set was way out there. It was so complicated. It required all this. So it ended up that over the course of 3 or 4 years, they started sort of acquiring these folks that were learning things like SketchUp, that were learning things like, AutoCAD, and had the ability to sort of do the digital stuff in that department, or do the new technology stuff. DITs, to go back to the camera department for a second, is a really good example of folks who owned and knew how to use computers and were not intimidated by the idea of something being recorded on a memory card when we had been downloading magazines of celluloid film for the last 100 years. And they were able to carve out a segment of the industry for themselves where they became invaluable to these legacy film production teams that had to move to digital for any variety of reasons. And so they were there with the knowledge of a technology, an emerging technology, a bleeding edge technology, when there was a need in the industry. So again, I'll come back maybe for the last time to the virtual production piece. There are all of these stages being built because we realize the value of having them, and everybody wants to work in them, but there is just no one to do the work. There is no one there to build the assets. There is no one there to build the screens, to run the screens, to rig the cameras appropriately, to make sure that the tracking is working, to correct the assets when they come up on the screen and they don't look right, to figure out why the camera isn't tracking properly. All of those sort of jobs, there is 1,000 jobs and like 100 people to do them. And so a lot of these new stages that are being built are struggling with the fact that the people aren't there. That's one example of 1,000 probably over our industry where technology is driving us forward, but we don't have the time to go back to school and learn about that technology. We instead have to, by osmosis, encourage the people that need to come and work with us on that stuff to come there and sort of work and teach how this stuff works to those teams that aren't necessarily digitally native. Now we look forward to today. The art department is what I would say is a somewhat digitally native department now. We do a ton of 3D design. A lot of sets are completely conceptualized virtually, pre-visualized digitally before a nail is ever hammered. In some cases, they're not hammered. They're 3D printed. There's so many different disciplines now that are digitally originated and then executed in the physical space, and pretty soon we'll get to the point where they're digitally originated and digitally executed as opposed to physically building them. And so I think that is maybe the trick that certainly maybe in retrospect that myself, Michael Cioni, some of the folks that started the first post-production facility that I started right out of school, that we sort of learned is like we knew how to do this stuff with off-the-shelf computers and off-the-shelf networking stuff. We didn't have the money to buy $1 million color corrector, so we figured out how to do it with Final Cut because we knew sort of enough about all of the off-the-shelf stuff that we could sort of trick people into trusting us into color correcting their movies. And so that was because we had the knowledge that not a lot of people had at a time where there was a huge need in the industry. And so I think if you can do that, if you can have the skills, be they technical or non, that the industry needs at a time where there's a big vacuum for that, you'll be given opportunities that you wouldn't normally be given simply because the industry is desperate and you have to take advantage of that.
Breaking that down to a real immediate thing, you guys are both blessed and cursed, right? one of the things that you're blessed for is there is this gap, especially in virtual production. Learn Unreal. All that stuff is free. You can download the software for free. There's so many tutorials that Epic puts out, that other people are putting out. You can learn ridiculous amounts of stuff and be way ahead of the game. My son was a game developer here, decided he wanted to get into film, did a 6-week of a 3-month internship out at View in Tampa, and was hired before he ever finished the internship. Why? Because he knew Unreal, right? And he had an eye for film, because his dad, right? So do that. But you're also cursed because all of that stuff is available to everybody. So don't wait on it. Like, get in there and start, having fun with it. My son for Christmas bought me a supercomputer just so I can get with Unreal and get in there and do environment stuff. So that is a huge gap right now. And if you do that and you're a filmmaker and you want to find a foot in the door, that is more than a foot, man. You're going to get like a whole arm and shoulder in there for sure. All right, we have time for maybe one more quick question.
Who's got a microphone?
Who's got that microphone? No worries.
Sorry. Hi, everybody. My name is Peter. I'm a student from New York City online in the recording arts. And I came down here for Hall of Fame, and I just had a question regarding music and how the process is for HBO and what that kind of looks like. Specifically, is the pool of composers and possibly licensing companies, is that already in mind? Is it different from show to show? Is it more in the hands of the producer, the network, the music supervisor, or the director?
Yeah, those are all great questions. So music is dealt with sort of somewhat holistically at the studio, with all of our clearances and licensing being done by our music clearancing department. But when it comes to composition, we certainly know composers, Ramin, for instance, who's done both Game of Thrones and Westworld, that are sort of in our, I wouldn't say stable, but our sort of first party to us. We've done work with them. We love them. They're incredibly creative, wonderful people, and we're happy to make an introduction to the showrunners, the creative talent on the show, to those people to see if there's a relationship that can form there. And sometimes people come in with composers that they've worked with before, that they love, and so we try to be incredibly supportive of the creative on the show. We want to be very, very filmmaker friendly. That's a hallmark of what makes HBO. And so we'll really run the gamut. We'll a big enough show will license, especially something like vinyl, where we're licensing all kinds of stuff. Now, Mick Jagger was a producer on vinyl, and so he had relationships with musicians where he could make an introduction, and we could hopefully get a favorable license out of those musicians. Some composition was done originally for the show, and so it really depends, right? I think a show like Game of Thrones, there's no licensed music. It's 100% composed because it's a fantasy piece and it wouldn't make sense to have something in there. Something like Westworld is licensed, but not the mechanical. We license the we license the rights to reproduce the music as player piano music. So we have contemporary music, but it's all we've recorded it ourselves, and so we'll do some shows that way. And then of course there's a huge amount of score for Westworld as well. And then some shows, Euphoria, things like that, are very contemporary and are very much licensed music. And they are, artists in some cases coming to us and working with us, and in some cases the other way around, where we will approach them. And so it really depends, but it is ultimately the job of the music supervisor on the show, and their relationship so far as licensings and things are concerned. And then the composer is traditionally, again, a relationship with the creative team on the show. That might be the showrunner, the director, that may be producers. It all sort of depends on the show.
All right, let's give Stephen a big hand. Check out your Hall of Fame app. He's doing a few other seminars if you have other questions, and some virtual reality seminars. You guys have a great day, all right? Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.